This week as I was doing some research, I found out that Venus, the planet, is known as the brilliant morning star. Now, the cool thing about a morning star is that it keeps on shining into the morning even as all the other stars have disappeared. It's something that is bright, that is beautiful, that stands out and keeps going. The Romans actually worshipped Venus as a goddess, but the Romans weren't the only ones to worship Venus. The Persians did also. Now, the Persian goddess of Venus was actually a goddess named Ishtar. And the Persian name Ishtar is actually likely the same name that was given to another woman in the Bible. However, we don't pronounce it Ishtar, we pronounce it Esther. Okay, now Queen Esther was a wonderful woman, and her story in the Bible is really interesting. It's very thought-provoking, it's very exciting, and in fact, it's so interesting and unusual that God himself isn't directly mentioned even a single time in the entire story. That doesn't mean that God isn't in the story. Actually, the author's goal is to get you to see God's hand in the story indirectly. And as we go, you're going to actually see his hand moving in every letter and in every word, but his name is never actually mentioned, not even once. So as we begin the story of Esther this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the entire first chapter of the book of Esther to kind of give us a platform here. But to begin, we're actually not going to see Esther at all. She doesn't even show up in the first chapter. In fact, the story begins with another woman, a woman whose name is Queen Vashti. So if you're following along with the YouVersion Bible app this morning, today's message is called Everyone's Replaceable. And we're going to be in Esther chapter 1, looking at verses 1 through 22, and we're going to see how God sets this up. So let's go ahead and jump into the text. We'll set up the scene and see what's going on here at the beginning of the book of Esther. Here we go. Now, in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the third year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. So, let's walk through a little bit of history here. So let's go ahead and let's put this first picture up here on the board. I'm going to help you understand some characters as we go here, all right? So about 100 years before this story starts, Jerusalem was seized by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, okay? You can read about that in the book of Daniel. However, as Nebuchadnezzar, he seized Jerusalem and he took a bunch of Jews back with him to live with him in Babylon. However, it wasn't very long until Nebuchadnezzar's grandson Belshazzar would actually lose that part of the kingdom to Medo-Persia. Now, at that time, a guy named Darius the Mede invaded and ruled under his nephew, King Cyrus the Great. So King Cyrus was king, and Darius the Mede was probably a general of some sort that overtook that part of Babylon. Now, Cyrus allowed some of the Jews to return to their home, but not all of them, and it was so that they could start rebuilding. Now, a couple of kings later, we see another Darius. This is different than Darius the Mede. This is Darius the First. Now, he would rule over Medo-Persia. Okay, so Medo-Persia took over Babylon, and now they're under the rule of Darius the First. And he also helped the Jews rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Then after him comes this guy, Ahasuerus, the guy we're talking about today. Now, I'm going to change his picture to something a little more familiar to you. You might know him as Xerxes. Okay, Ahasuerus and Xerxes the First are the same guy. If you've ever seen the movie 300, Rise of an Empire, not the original 300, but the sequel, that is actually Xerxes in that movie, all right? So if that's a little more familiar to you, I thought that would be helpful. So, now you can read about all the stuff I just mentioned in the books of Nehemiah, Ezra, Daniel, Haggai, right? And those books will fill you in on all of the exile issues with Jerusalem and the Jews leaving and getting taken to Babylon and Babylon being taken over to where we get to this point in Esther where this guy Xerxes is now ruling, okay? Now, if you went to Iran today, you would see a place called the Persepolis. And this is actually some images here of the actual Persepolis, even as it stands today, okay? This was the palace that was in existence during the story of Esther. Right, this is the remains of a palace that was started by Darius the First, okay, so Xerxes' dad, and then Xerxes took over the construction after his dad, and he kept going, and then after him, it went on even through Artaxerxes, the guy after him. So this was a palace that was built up over generations, all right? And as I said, this is also likely the place where all of the events in the book of Esther actually take place. all right? It was huge and it was elaborate. So basically, to get in there, you walk up this staircase here, which there was a huge monument that you would walk through on the way in. And when you get in there, you see 5 different palaces on the inside of this, palace section, the Persepolis. Now, the throne hall, right, was more than 56,000 square feet. All right, this is where the kings would hang out on their throne. That's roughly the size of the White House today. Okay, so pretty big building just for the throne room of the leader of the Medo-Persia. Now, this was sat on an upper terrace, and the upper terrace itself was 250 acres. All right, so this is a big place. Just one palace sits on 250 acres. But you can't forget that Xerxes had his own personal palace that was built there as well. And his palace was 40,000 square feet, and the ceilings were more than 60 feet high, which was dwarfed by the palace that he actually finished for his dad, Darius I, which was 74,000 square feet, which was able to hold 10,000 people inside. Okay, so this was a big house for the king, the emperor of Medo-Persia. It was a testament to the story of the Persian Empire, to the power and the might of the Persian Empire. Now, at its height, we don't usually think of the Persian Empire as the same plane as Rome, but actually, the Persian Empire's power was really pretty close to being equal to that of Rome, and some scholars think that Medo-Persia was actually more powerful than Rome at its height. Now, this empire actually covered Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, and parts of Egypt, Sudan, and Libya today. So this empire was very large. Now, Xerxes took control at about the height of the Medo-Persian Empire. All right, that's the king we're talking about today. Ahasuerus or Xerxes was in charge at the height of the power of this empire. But he was about to foul it all up. Okay, Xerxes was about to make some mistakes. See, what happened was a decade before this, all right, when Darius I, Xerxes' dad, was still on the throne, he decided he wanted to invade Greece because they were insubordinate. Now, Darius I's campaign was largely successful, but as they were marching to Athens, which was supposed to be like the last big victory, some things went really bad. More than 25,000 Persian troops lost to about 11,000 Greeks. All right, so more than twice the number of troops lost. And the Persians lost about 6,400 men and 7 ships, while Greece lost 203 men only. All right, so Greece kicked the pants out of the Medo-Persian advancing army. So they had to return back to the Medo-Persian Empire. They didn't completely conquer Greece, and this didn't set well with Darius I, and it really didn't set well with his son Xerxes. All right? So, right now we're about 486 BC, all right? That was when Xerxes became king. Now in his 3rd year, so we're about 483 BC, so it's 10 years after his dad tried to invade Greece and he couldn't get in, and Xerxes wants to finish it. So Xerxes is building up his army during this 3-year period so far, and he has another time to go during the story of Esther, all right? So it's really important that we know that's what's going on in the king's mind, right? He's getting ready to attack Greece on behalf of his father who lost, so that he could take over Greece and make the Persian Empire that much greater, all right? Now, it's really important. All right, if you grab your Connect card on the way in, you're going to fill in your blanks as we go through the story. Here's the first one. Here's what you need to know about what's going on with King Ahasuerus or King Xerxes. Here's your first one. Pride isn't all it's cracked up to be. Pride isn't all it's cracked up to be. Everything we read in this story takes place while Xerxes is planning and prepping his invasion. During this preparation period, he built over 1,000 ships. They built these 4,200-foot-long pontoon bridges to cross land troops into Greece. And I actually have a picture here. It's not a real picture, but they had to build this pontoon bridge to cross the ocean, essentially, or part of the ocean, the strait, to get over to Greece. It was 4,200 feet long. And they built 2 of them side by side so that the land troops could march into Greece to attack. But he also had to attack by sea, and see, they had a problem. The first time they attacked, the ships that tried to go around Greece ended up facing a storm, and they didn't want that to happen, so they actually dug a canal across the island of Greece there so that they could cut through and get to the other side quickly so that the ships could go back and forth. That's a lot of construction to take care of when you don't have tractors and stuff like that. That canal was 1.5 miles long, so it's quite a big thing to do with a bunch of guys with wooden shovels and stuff like that, okay? Now, he also trained up to what a lot of scholars estimate to be about 100,000 troops from 46 different nations. All right, and actually Herodotus said that there were 2.5 million troops, but a lot of scholars are like, no, that's way too high. It's more like 100,000. Okay? Now that matters. Why does it matter that we know Xerxes built 1,000 ships, a huge canal, a bunch of bridges, trained up all these guys, 100,000 men? Why does that matter? Well, it tells us about Xerxes. We know this. He's wealthy, he's powerful, he's angry, and he's stressed out. He's got to be stressed out putting all that stuff together. And he's also overflowing with pride. Look at everything I've got. Look what I can do. As a matter of fact, as he was building all this stuff up, he threw a party for 180 days to show off all the stuff he was doing. Right? That's a 6-month party for all the leaders and rulers and military guys of Persia. That is a huge waste of resources, right? I mean, that's a crazy thing to do, to party for 6 months. Look at all the stuff we got. But at the end of that 6-month period, he wasn't done showing off. He wasn't done partying. Let's look at Esther 1:5 and see what he did after he threw that giant 6-month party. Verse 5. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. So on top of a 6-month-long party for the military people and the politicians and stuff, he then throws a 7-day party for everybody who lives in Susa. An entire city he threw a week-long party for. I mean, that was the capital of the Persian Empire. So that's probably a lot of people, right? And basically he's saying, everyone, look at my stuff. Look at how great I am. This was so elaborate that the writer of Esther didn't even know what he was talking about. Now, the translation that we just read says that there were white cotton curtains. But the original says some white stuff was there. Didn't even know what it was. It was so fancy that he's like, yeah, there was white stuff there at this party. Didn't even know. So whoever wrote this down, this story of Esther, was probably just a common man or a common person. Tradition says that it was Mordecai, but the book never actually tells us anything. So whoever wrote this down was probably a common person. Perhaps it was Mordecai. We don't know. And so at this party, the king says, drink as much or drink as little as you want. See, back then there was a thing where it was like, if you go to a party and you're not going to drink, but everyone else is drinking, you had to leave. No designated drivers back then. It was like, you're out, go home. We just want all the drunk people here. It was rude to stick around and not drink if everyone else was drinking. But the king lifted that rule. He said, do whatever you want. This is a party. Enjoy yourself. You don't want to drink? Don't drink. You want to drink? Go ahead. Whatever. We have as much wine as you need. Have a good time, guys. And so at the end of this, the party still wasn't over because it becomes ladies' night at the palace. Queen Vashti throws a party for all of the women there. So this is Xerxes' wife, Ahasuerus' wife, Queen Vashti. She throws a nice party for the women now. And, as with most drunken parties, someone does something and some drama ensues. So let's see what this looks like. Let's check out the drama at the big party in Persia. Esther 1:10. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, so he's drunk, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zathar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, delivered by the eunuchs, and at this the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Now, Vashti is a very interesting character. We don't know a whole lot about her. Now, a lot of people think that Queen Vashti was Persian, okay, and if so, she could have been Xerxes' wife that we know from antiquity as someone named Amestris. So Amestris and Vashti might be the same person. However, a lot of people actually think that Amestris was actually Esther, and so Vashti would have been the queen before Amestris that wasn't written down because nobody liked her. Now, Vashti is also thought to maybe have been the great-granddaughter of King Nebuchadnezzar, the guy that took over Jerusalem and exiled all of the Jews. And so there's a chance that when Belshazzar was attacked by Persia, that they found this little girl named Vashti hidden in a back room, and Darius felt bad for her and then gave her to Xerxes to become his wife. We don't know. We don't really know who Vashti is. There's a couple of possibilities there, but we don't know. The other thing that we don't know about Vashti is this. Was Queen Vashti the victor, the villain, or the victim in this story? We don't actually really know the answer to that question either. Now, notice that Vashti was commanded to stand before the king, right? She got a message from the eunuchs, go stand in front of the king and all of his nobles. They want to see you. Now, according to Jewish history, what was happening is the king and the nobles were sitting around in their room. They were all drunk, hanging out, and they're all bragging about their hot wives. Dude, my wife is so hot. No, dude, my wife is hotter. And they're going back and forth. And the king is like, Vashti is the hottest one. And to prove that she's worthy of her name, the word Vashti actually probably means the best lady, he ordered that she appear before him and all the nobles with her crown. But what you might not realize is a Jewish scholar would say that that's not the best translation. It's not that she was ordered to present herself with her royal crown. She was supposed to present herself with only her royal crown. She was supposed to be naked, only wearing her crown, is what she was ordered to do. Now, Vashti, of course, turned this down, and there are a lot of feminist Christians and Jews who actually see Vashti as the heroine in this story. You know, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was an early feminist, actually said this about Queen Vashti. She said that Vashti added new glory to her day and generation by her disobedience, for resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. Okay? Now, I can't imagine today any husband, at least in this room, asking his wife to do something like that. Hey, honey, me and my buddies were just talking about who we think's the hottest. You want to come in here with just your bathrobe on or, whatever? Like, no guy would do that, right? To us, that's like so foreign and wrong and inappropriate. Like we would never do that, right? That's more something you see like a cartel boss doing in a movie or something. That's not something real people do. So in this case, Vashti seems to be standing for her own self-dignity and standing for her own honor, something that makes her sound like the victor in this story. But actually, there are other accounts that say that Vashti's disobedience was a problem for other reasons. So you might think she's the heroine because she refused to display herself in a sinful way. But that makes a big assumption. That assumes that Vashti had a problem displaying herself naked. And actually, there are a lot of accounts that say that Vashti likely displayed herself naked all the time, that this was a very normal thing to do in Persian culture. So for her to show up naked with her crown on wouldn't have been a big deal to her. So if that's the case, it's not so much that she was trying to do the right thing to not show up. It's more that she just wanted to be disobedient and disrespectful to her husband. She just wanted to embarrass him in front of all the nobles, okay? Which makes her a little bit less of a victor and a little bit more of a villain. According to the Midrash, which is a Jewish rabbinic commentary that was made between 400 and 1200 AD, okay, they say that this wasn't actually true at all. They say what actually happened was during this feast, Vashti forced all the Jewish women to work and to serve her even on the Sabbath, and that made God mad, so she was struck with leprosy right then and there for making the Jews work on the Sabbath. And so when her husband called her, hey, come up here before me, she said no because she was embarrassed because of her leprosy. And so they say that's actually what happened, that this was a punishment from God. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what the Midrash says. But maybe it was neither of those things. Maybe it's not so much that she's the villain. Maybe she's not the victor. Maybe it's neither one of those things. Maybe she really had nothing to gain. Maybe she was trying to do the right thing. Maybe she was just a victim of an evil king. That's also very well a possibility. She could have been a villain, a victor, a victim, or any combination of the three. But either way, we know this. This is true in the story no matter how you look at it, okay? Here's your next fill in the blank. Disrespect carries negative consequences. And that's true. Vashti insulted the king, and he is mad. He is really mad about this. It's hard to be disrespected, isn't it, church? When you feel like somebody's disrespecting you, that can be hard to swallow. It can be hard if it's your friends, or your boss, or your kids, or your spouse. You know, when a wife acts with pride and disrespect and then her husband responds with pride and anger, that's a recipe for disaster. It doesn't matter if you're a Persian king or an American business owner or whatever you are. There's a reason that the Bible tells women to be respectful of their husbands and men to be gentle with their wives and slow to anger. There's a reason that's in there. It's not because God's mean or anything else like that. It's because it has negative consequences when you mistreat people. So let's see how this plays out, right? Vashti won't appear before the king. The king's mad. So what happens? Esther 1:13. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in the law and judgment, the men next to him being Karshena, Shathar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom, according to the law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she's not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs. So the king turns around to these guys and says, hey, what should I do here? Now, these men who know the times, now knowing the times either means that because they were astrologers, they knew like the stars and the meaning of the times that way. And so he's turning to them and basically they're going to read him his horoscope. You know, according to the planet Mercury, you should, dismiss your wife or whatever. They're reading him his horoscope. The other thing that it could be happening here is that they know the times as in the past times, as in these are historians. So they're going to look at the history of Persia and say, hey, this is the precedent, here's what you should do, okay? Here's what you need to know. Here's your next fill in the blank on this one. Don't trust ungodly advice. That's what he's about to do here, all right? Now, these were the king's closest guys. From Xerxes' dad all the way on down for all the Persian emperors, they all had 7 advisors that could come and go before the king however they please. That's what it means by they saw his face. They're allowed to come in, they can go, whatever. They don't need an announcement or an invitation. They can just walk up to the king and talk to him. And as we're going to learn in the future, we'll see that not everyone gets that privilege, okay? So let's see what these trusted advisors tell the king to do with his wife. He says, guys, what should I do? Here's what they say, Esther 1:16. Then Memucan said, in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, well, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will all say the same thing to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. If it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So, when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. So, King Ahasuerus says, what should I do, guys? And his advisor, Memucan, says, dude, when women hear that the king's wife doesn't listen, all the women in the kingdom aren't going to listen to their husbands. Don't do that to us, kingy. It's like, wait, what? You really think that's what's going to happen? Because the king shows mercy to his wife, the whole kingdom is going to have a bunch of women running over their husbands. It seems a little bit extreme, but that's actually not the worst part of the situation here. The worst part is I see King Ahasuerus making a decision that is made way too often today. Since you made me angry, our marriage is over. I'm going to move on to someone I like better. That's the recommendation. Now, King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, was actually a very foolish man. Later on, you remember that pontoon bridge that I told you guys about? So when it was actually time for him to invade Greece, a storm came in and broke part of the bridge. So this whole army shows up to cross these bridges, and they're messed up from this storm. Well, King Xerxes, of course, gets angry at the ocean. It's the ocean's fault. So what he actually does is he orders his soldiers to whip the sea, to poke it with red-hot irons, and then he threw handcuffs into the sea to symbolize it coming under his authority. And then he ordered all the engineers of the bridge to all be beheaded. Smart guy. I'll bet that fixed the problem, right? Well, actually, later when they finally did attack Greece, they ended up having to retreat. When they got back to the bridge was messed up again, and they had to fix it in order to come home. So the ocean didn't even listen to his red-hot poker torture. Do you ever get angry and just do something really dumb? Like you turn around and you punch a hole in the drywall as if the wall is what made you angry, and then you have to fix it, which the punch takes like half a second and the fixing takes like, well, depending on how handy you are, it's like 6 years or whatever. You ever say something really dumb to someone that you regret and then they hold it against you for like years afterwards? You remember when you said that? Do you ever threaten like a ridiculous retaliation? Like you make some bold statement in your anger that you'll never keep, like, I will never eat chocolate cake again, right? And it's like, okay, good luck with that. Your nephew's birthday is next week. Okay? Like, when we're angry, we do dumb things. Here's what you need to know, church, your next fill in the blank. Anger is not a good thing. Now, I should throw in a caveat here. I'm talking about human anger. Okay, God's wrath is different. But human anger is not a good thing. Now, Scripture never tells us that anger is a sin, right? Anger is not a sin. But it does tell us a lot about what anger does to us when we let it rule over us. Okay, Psalm 37:8 says this, refrain from anger and forsake wrath, fret not yourself because it tends only to evil. Right? Now, anger isn't sin, but for humans, it always leads us towards it. Study the Bible. It says a few very important things about sin. There are 5 things I notice in Scripture that Scripture tells us about sin. Number 1, it says, you will get angry. It's unavoidable. As human beings, we are going to get angry. The second thing it tells us is, but try not to get angry. The third thing it tells us is, but when you do get angry, get rid of it as fast as you can. And then it says, if you don't get rid of it, you're an idiot. That's a little bit of my own translation there, but basically that's what the Scripture says. You're foolish if you don't get rid of your anger. And then the last thing it says about anger is all that stuff, that's because your anger doesn't produce good things. If you don't believe what I'm telling you, I've put a whole bunch of passages at the end of the YouVersion Bible app that you can look at all those, and I encourage you to study those passages and think about what it says about anger and ask yourself, do I still think anger is a good thing? Sometimes we want to defend anger, right? We have this thing that we talk about called righteous anger. But the problem is that James tells us that our own anger never leads to righteousness. Our own human anger never is righteous. And the Bible never says that anger is a good thing for people. Actually, it's funny because if you look at Galatians 5:19 through 24, right? That's the works of the Spirit. What are the works of the Spirit? Right? Love, joy, anger. Now, anger doesn't actually make the list. Some of you are like, sounds right to me. No, actually, it says it's that the things of the Spirit are peace, patience, gentleness, self-control is in there. All things that go against anger, right? And it's interesting because if anger was good, you would think that it would be on the list of the works of the Spirit. But instead, it shows up on a different list. A little bit later in verse 19, the works of the flesh. It says, now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, which is anger, strife, which comes from anger, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, and it goes on. Why is anger not included in the list of the works of the Spirit, but it is included in the list of the works of the flesh? That should tell us a little bit about anger, because anger for a human is not a good thing. So what does the king do with his anger now? He's angry, and so the first thing he does is he goes to his buddies. Many of you men in this room, if you're angry at your wife, shouldn't go to your buddies. They're not going to have good advice to you. They're going to say something like what they told the king. Dude, get rid of her, man. You don't need that. Get someone better. And if you don't, every woman in the kingdom is going to think it's cool to disobey their husbands. You got to divorce her and never see her again. Because she didn't go around prancing naked in front of you and your friends? Really? Is that really fair? Well, let's find out what Xerxes thinks about it. Esther 1:21. This is the last part of the passage this morning. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. He says, yeah, I don't need her. Cast her out. I'll go find someone better, and won't she be jealous? And you know what? I'm going to write a letter, and I'm going to tell everyone about how dumb she is. I'll trash her reputation in every known language across 127 provinces because I'm angry. Honestly, that sounds like the sort of relationship games that people still play today, doesn't it? I mean, maybe we're not in charge of 127 provinces, but we still like to do bad things to our spouse or our significant other, whoever makes us angry. This behavior isn't just sick for a king, it's sick for anyone. Here's your next fill in the blank, church. Marriage is a partnership, not a war. Marriage is a partnership and not a war, and sometimes we forget that. When your relationship becomes a competition about who is more wrong, rather than a partnership that's trying to honor God, you're in trouble from the get-go. I've heard a lot of married couples sit down and try to sell me on how horrible their spouse is. They never do this, they always say that, I wish they would just do this, and they're always so well rehearsed, and sadly they do the same thing that Ahasuerus does here. What he should do as the king is go sit down face to face with his wife. Keep in mind, he hasn't even seen her yet. He should sit down with her face to face and say, why didn't you come? What's wrong? I feel disrespected by you. So let's work on this. That would be a healthy thing to do in a relationship. But he says, no, I'm going to stick it to you. I'm going to make you pay. It's over. Ladies, your respect is one of the most valuable things that you can give your husband, and husbands, your love is just as valuable to your wife. And so at the end of this story, we don't actually know what happens to Vashti after this. Likely she was either executed or banished from the kingdom. Either way, it wasn't good for her, right? And this happened to the queen of the biggest empire in the world at the time. That's why this message is titled, Everyone's Replaceable. Even the most powerful king in the known world at the time, the queen, was lost to history, essentially, other than the Bible. Now, I know we all like to be important, right? We all don't want to be replaceable. We want to be important. Anybody ever heard of a guy named Michael Schumacher? He's a race car driver, or was a race car driver. When he retired, he held the record for the most championship titles in F1. He had the most wins, the most pole positions, and the most podium finishes of every driver who ever raced in Formula One. But one of Schumacher's most famous quotes was this. He said, "Everyone's replaceable, including me," which was true. Because since he retired in 2012, all of those records have been broken. There's a young kid, I say young kid, he's my age, Lewis Hamilton, now holds all of those records that I just mentioned. Although he is tied with Schumacher for championships, but he's still racing, so he can still beat that. So church, even the greatest driver in the world can be replaced. The idea of being replaceable is uncomfortable. You know, as people, we like safety, we like security, we like being the best, getting the credit, being recognized, but there's something more important than just being irreplaceable. Let me ask you this. Why was Vashti removed? Actually, Memucan said it directly to the king, the reason she was going to be removed. He said, "Let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she." Somebody was going to come along who was better than that queen. Now, I don't know how well you know the story of Esther, but she was removed because God had somebody better in mind. God wanted Esther to be in that position. He wanted someone who loved him. He wanted someone who trusted him. He wanted someone who was going to honor him. And the truth is, that should be our motivation too. What I see here is God going a long way to get the attention of his people, even going so far as to remove the most powerful queen in the world from her throne. And if that's true, what do you think God is willing to do to get your attention? Well, I can give you an example of what God is willing to do to get your attention. How about coming down to the earth in the flesh? How about placing himself under the authority of even the most wicked of men? How about enduring an unjust trial where he was beaten and whipped and forced to carry his own instrument of death high up on a hill where he would publicly die humiliated in front of the entire world? If that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. I'd say it's a pretty radical way to do it. That's why Jesus wants so badly for us to remember that. He wants us to remember his sacrifice and what he's done. And thankfully, I have one more point for you guys this morning, and this is it. Thankfully, we are replaceable. What do I mean by that? What's replaceable? Well, before Jesus made that powerful statement to the world by dying on a cross, what he did was he sat down with his disciples and he took bread with them. And he took the bread and he explained that it represented his body, a body that would be broken for them. After he took the bread, he took the cup. And he explained that what was in the cup was his blood, which would be shed for the sins of many. And the truth is, Jesus wanted us to know that he lived a good and sinless and perfect life, and his blood was perfect, and that even though we are all sinners, no matter how bad we are, all of our life's accomplishments of sin and darkness are replaceable. They can be switched out. Jesus came to replace what we have done with what he has done. He could take our sinful life and replace it with his blood. He could take our filthy rags and replace them with his righteousness. Thank God we are replaceable.